What is at stake is a big idea, a new world order.
Alright, hello everybody who's still subscribed to Esoteric Worldviews. Thank you for staying tuned and keeping up to date with the channel. I know I haven't been making a lot of videos in the past year or two actually, but my political understanding, my political leanings, my political interests have all peaked quite a bit, and so I would like to begin making some more videos for this channel. So I was looking for what I want to open up with today. Where to begin? See, that's the thing with making new videos and whatnot. Where in the heck am I going to begin? Excuse this terrible infected mosquito bite on my neck. It looks awful. Oh, so we can use some lens flare or some video effect to get that out of there. Okay, so where to begin with all this? And I decided that what I want to begin with in terms of politics and what's been changing with the world lately is Russia, because this is one of the most important things. I'm going to read to you something that I saw posted on a forum, which is really, really very good and insightful. It could have been written by an intelligence analyst, and it might have probably was. A forum called /POL/poll, where you find a lot of very unique people, certainly interpretation of information. I kind of think of it as the very center of the quantum nexus of the brain of the internet, if you want to kind of think about it like that. It's the quantum potentiality of what you see in other places on the internet. A hell of a lot of it comes from 4chan, but I don't go to 4chan, I use 8chan anyway. There's that. So this is where you might have seen this before if you go to this site. It was a post titled "Geopolitical Censorship, Gamergate, and You," and I haven't got into Gamergate yet, but I'll start to talk about that. But this has a whole type of This as a whole is more about the Russian geopolitical situation going on right now. So, before I start reading the article, I'll give my own little commentary. You might remember way back in 2008 during the Chinese Olympics, there was this strange couple days long war. I don't know how long the war was between Russia and Georgia backed by NATO, and Russia who was being instigated to fight. I mean, for the last 2 decades or so, NATO has been gradually encroaching on Russia, and basically the idea is that militarily, Russia is one big plane. From Germany to Russia, it's one big plane. So if they can set up their NATO bases in places like Estonia, Latvia, Poland, they can encircle Russia. And I'm sure you've heard that before, encircling Russia, which basically means that in case of any war, Russia will be indefensible. So that's why that we're coming to a head right now, is because with NATO trying to encircle Russia and trying to install its puppets like Poroshenko, which was revealed to be a CIA puppet in the WikiLeaks document. Poroshenko is the current president of Ukraine. I'll do another video on that one. Let me jot that down on my videos ideas tabs. Let's see, video ideas. Petro Poroshenko, that's definitely one of them. Shenko, WikiLeaks. Boy, if you want to know what's going on in Russia, all you need to do is look at the names of the major players, where the money's going, follow the money and the power. For example, one of the biggest supporters of the Nazi battalions, the Nazi battalion Azov Brigade in Ukraine, is a Ukrainian Jewish oligarch by the name of Igor Kolomoisky or something like this. And Kolomoisky, he owns the largest natural gas company in Ukraine. And guess who is sitting on the board of executives, I believe is what it was, or somebody who had he had just been put in one of the top managerial executive positions on this natural gas company owned by this Ukrainian Jewish oligarch who is funding paramilitary groups in Ukraine. It is no less of an American elite than Vice President Joe Biden's son. So Vice President Joe Biden's son is on the board of a natural gas company in Ukraine owned by warlords. That's really been the theme of the whole New World Order, is to create military elites around the world through places like the School of the Americas, which you probably heard about, but train up groups of elites, mainly military elite, that they can use, economic elite, of course, intelligence elite, not just intelligentsia, scientists and things, but intelligence elites, which they can use to infiltrate all these countries all over the world, and to basically monopolize all of the resources in the planet into the hands of the central bankers through the debts given by the World Bank, IMF, things like this. Like I said, I've been into politics for a while now. I've been getting really involved in politics. I understand how it works now. So through this debt slavery, through actual military slavery, by we create the military elites in a lot of these places. We control them. And of course, America is the greatest military power on the planet. It's the greatest investment. I like to think of the U.S. military as a kind of like an investment security, as a down payment, a deposit. Because as you probably know, the U.S. military, there's more spent by America on the U.S. military. I say by America, but it's by this what a guy named Walter Bower calls the cryptocrats, or the secret government. The amount of money spent on the U.S. military is more than all other countries combined, and that's because it is the ultimate insurance policy on the monopolization of the world's resources, the debt slavery of every country in the world. They have to pay back their debt. They have to become debt slaves, because if they don't, we have the U.S. military, and we'll democratize them, right? Like, look at Gaddafi. Gaddafi, he wanted to start trading oil and gold. He was taken out. Saddam wanted to trade oil in euros. He was taken out because the fact that oil is only traded in dollars is what keeps our superpower viable, which is not a good sign, because with things like the BRICS alliance and other things going on right now in the world, our superpower status is being questioned. And actually that brings us right back to the subject of what we're going to talk about. The world's America's role as the world's only superpower was, to some extent, an illusion. It tried to come out and make this unipolar order, but it failed, because they just overstretched themselves like empires do. They couldn't even hold down Iraq. So Russia is sitting here looking back. Countries like Russia and China are sitting here looking back and saying, are we going to allow NATO? Are we going to allow America and its allies, England, France, etc., to just go in and remove everyone who opposes their financial debt slavery scheme that's not even working? It's not even sustainable, and we have no idea who the real benefits are going to central bankers and not to nations. Or it's possible that Putin and China and whatnot are just controlled opposition. We don't really quite know that. But we do know that whether you want to think that or not, there is a definite real opposition happening between Russia and America right now. That's going to decide the fate of the 21st century. Spoiler, it's going to probably end up, Israel is going to probably end up being the world hegemony. But that's for completely unrelated reasons to nothing to do with this broadcast, which I'll talk about at another time. In fact, why don't I write that down again? Israel as world hegemon. Israel hegemon. See if we can make another video about that. Okay, so basically, the events since the Georgian War, Obama's attempted invasion of Syria, of course, the crisis in the Ukraine and the annexation of Crimea, which are huge historical events. I mean, I cannot think of the last time the war in the Ukraine. It was worse than the war in the Balkans, which was also fought over similar reasons as the war in Ukraine is fought over. Basically, it was a NATO versus Russian proxy war, with NATO backing Bosnia and whatnot for whatever reason, and Russia backing Serbia again for whatever reason. Probably because Russia was on the defensive and NATO, as they are, always on the offensive. Like I said, they've moved their bases. They broke their agreement. NATO, if any of my subscribers don't know what NATO is, and please, please pay attention a little bit to the news. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization is a security bloc made for mutual defense of Western countries who are signatories to it. Article 9 says that if any NATO country is attacked, it means an attack on the whole. So it's a power bloc used to keep America and Europe united as world hegemon, basically. And there is an Eastern version of that called the Warsaw Pact, which involved Eastern Europe, Russia, and so since after World War II up until the USSR fell, there are these two main power blocs which kind of held the world in a equilibrium, if you want to call it that, even though really what happened was that they used that interplay to create a sort of Hegelian dialectic where, problem, reaction, solution. Okay, the Russians, they're beefing up their missile research. That means we need to beef up our missile research. Oh, they're spending more on military. That means we need to spend more on our military. Oh, they're working on mind control. Oh, that means that we need to work on mind control. That is another video that I'm going to make. I've been reading a great book on the actual facts. It's not any conspiratorial BS or anything like that, but actual facts about mind control research, MK Ultra, which this country has and still uses to this day. So so we have to get involved in this country because the Russians are involved in that country. So basically, no matter whether it was just kind of just an uncontrollable cause of chain of events or whether it was engineered to be that way by the power elite, I kind of suspect that it might have been a combination of both. Either way, that was the basis of power for the last since after World War II. And so now NATO, after the fall of the Soviet Union, began to expand and incorporate countries like Estonia and Latvia, which are on Russia's border, literally. So NATO is literally expanded up to Russia's border. And Russia is feeling very threatened. So let me get to what I'm going to read about. I've been talking for 15 minutes, but this will be a good video, I promise. So here we go. So the author says that he's acted in some capacity as a political advisor for a certain think tank and some local analysis by proxy. While I haven't gotten access to the privileged information, I have some connections to piece information back together. I've been most impressed with the ability of you guys to piece things together and was surprised to see you dig as far as you have. He's going to talk about He was talking about the people on pole. I'm drinking out of this big gallon thing because I don't have a cup near me. Excuse me for being rude here. Okay, so the beginning. The article, Geopolitical Censorship, Gamergate and You. The Cold War is back. Now, some of you might be from polls, so you'll be immediately familiar with what I have to say. And he cites all of his references. So there's at least about 30 sourced articles, which is why I like this discussion site, because there's always well-sourced discussion. It's not just, oh, this person said, it's not just a bunch of kids, it's people that actually, they have a very, very low tolerance for bullshit, so you better source everything you put on there, and it's another reason, like I said, why I like this site. Okay, so, beginning. The Cold War is back. Now, some of you might be from polls, so you'll be immediately familiar with what I have to say, but for completeness, I'll introduce you to the reasons why the Cold War is back with a vengeance. It all began back in 2006, when the SCO... My kitty's gonna not let me continue to open the door, huh? Are you gonna go back outside? Yeah, good kitty, get the fuck out of here. The SCO, which is the Security Cooperation Organization, which is kind of like a NATO for Eastern countries. It involves China, Russia, I think it might be Iran also, as a security cooperation organization. So it's almost like a new Warsaw Pact, which uses the new countries which are aligned in a security alliance. Basically all the non-NATO big major powers are formed into the Security Cooperation Organization. Russia, China is the main two. So it all began back in 2006 when the Security Cooperation Organization acted to attack the US dollar due to the failed attempt by the US to implement the new Middle East plan. So they're talking about the clean break plan, where they're going to basically start all these revolutions in the Middle East and bring to power secular humanists. If you go up and read about the clean break plan, like I wrote about it, it's bizarre. Like they think that they could have their new Middle East where they could bring in their Zionist bankers, they could bring in their multiculturalism, they could bring in their liberalism, they can make this whole one world order of debt slavery to them. That's what they wanted with their new Middle East. So the SCO, Security Cooperation Organization, acted to attack the US dollar, and that's what's been going on right now, is currency wars, economic wars, which frighteningly is exactly what preceded the First World War. And a lot of people have drawn parallels to what's happening now to the First World War, and that's another reason why I wanted to make this video, because I felt that it was important to inform my viewers and hopefully maybe get some new viewers to follow me and listen to my banter. Excuse me. It all started back in 2006 when the SCO acted to attack the US dollar due to the failed attempt by the US to implement the new Middle East plan via the war in Lebanon. At this point, he cites two articles, and we could go into it, but I'm not going to go into it. Let's just, for the sake of brevity, which is pretty impossible at this point, we'll say that they got their ass kicked in Lebanon. So the neocons got their ass kicked in Lebanon, and Lebanon, of course, which is a proxy of Iran. Syria also happens to be a proxy of Iran, and part of the new Middle East plan was to take out the power block of Iran, undermine Iran's power block by taking out Syria through proxy war. There's actually a frigging paper written by Zionist neocon fucking evil Zionists like Douglas Feith, written way back in the 90s, saying that they were going to launch a proxy war on Syria, and it's all for this new Middle East, this project for new Middle East, and for Israel's security, and who the hell else knows what the hell their intentions are. definitely to create a new world order. I think that their ultimate intention is to create a false apocalypse scenario and then bring out their false messiah and try to unite the world under Jerusalem, under some kind of version of like a new age religion that they genuinely believe will bring humanity together. These people are fucking insane. They're the Dajjal, they're the Antichrist, which we'll be talking more about. Again, the SCO in 2006 decided to attack the dollar due to the failed attempt by the U.S. to implement the New Middle East Plan via the war in Lebanon, meaning they got their asses kicked. So China and Russia are looking back like, you guys are supposed to be knowing what you're doing, what's going on. Should we trust you? Should we not trust you? Should we have faith on you? At this point, should the U.S. have done nothing else, it would have faced a certain run on its currency. The neocons under Bush and Cheney then plotted the Georgian War, which was meant to put Russia face to face with NATO in Georgia. This plan blew up in their face the moment Russians threatened to use tactical nuclear weapons in Georgia should NATO remain in their positions. The planners hoped that with Putin in China for the Olympics, Russia would let the Georgia attack on South Ossetia slide. They didn't, and we all know what happened next. So again, part of NATO trying to encircle Russia. What isn't widely advertised is that NATO effectively struck back, flooding the Black Sea with vessels, essentially cutting off Russia's Crimean port from safe access to the Mediterranean. That's when a certain character, who was probably unknown to you at the time, stepped in. Bashar Assad opened the Tartus port of to the Black Sea fleet, effectively burning NATO's card as the Russian fleet can safely amass in the Mediterranean Sea. Bashar Assad opened the Tartus port, is a deepwater seaport in Syria. So he basically screwed over NATO. So through this little bit by bit, NATO has been, saber rattling with the SCO. So they screwed up. And after these series of failures, confidence in the U.S. geostrategy collapsed. And with it, confidence in the U.S. dollar and U.S. stock market collapsed as well. This was, of course, in 2008 when we had that almost near financial collapse. We all know what happened in September, and with that, the neocon team was officially out the door. So that's when we saw the neocons make their exit because the Illuminists who control the world decided that they were incompetent, which makes me fucking laugh because I could have fucking told you that back in 2005 when I was 16 years old. Part 2, enter Obama. While the neocons screwed up in the international scene, the establishment had been busy brewing up a plan B months earlier. It was a hot race between Obama and Clinton, with the latter strangely holding on to the race despite the guaranteed defeat she faced. At the time, Clinton had hinted that she was sticking in the race just in case something were to happen to Obama. Some strong indication that sabotage may have been on the table, but 2 days later, after an alleged power broker meeting at Bilderberg 2008, Hillary pulled out. Obama himself ran a social media campaign in order to appear a grassroots contender. Many diehard Obama fans still believe that they still own whatever he does or decides, which is why they never can fault his actions. That's why the liberals never criticize him, because they think, oh, he's grassroots, he's black, he's not establishment, blah, blah, blah. At the time, the establishment was fixated on social media, as it seemed to be a far easier way to sway people than the traditional media that had lost credibility thanks largely to the war in Iraq. Trying their luck, a crude attempt was made to create a civil war in Iran back in 2009 via the Green Revolution, which I'm sure you remember that there's a failed civil war in Iraq. Iran, which again is Israel's greatest enemy. More proof that if our nation hasn't been hijacked by Israel, or by Jews in general, some kind of Jews, that we are being influenced to do its dirty work somehow, some way, whether through blackmail or whatever. So this green revolution failed in Iran, of course, which is meant to overthrow the regime in Iran, and divide and conquer. The whole clean break strategy, which I talk about in earlier videos, is divide and conquer. So this failed due to Iran's internet censorship apparatus. You know, that's pretty scary that the information war of the U.S. military has come to such a point where, and I say U.S. military because the CIA are small potatoes compared to the U.S. military. The U.S. military is able to just flick on a button. They've developed their information war campaign to such an extent they can just flick on a button and create a revolution in another country, like they created the Arab Spring. So their attempt to create a civil war in Iran failed thanks to Iran's internet censorship apparatus, but it was an important event to note and a learning experience. At the time, the Russians were wooed into a cozier relationship with the U.S., with the new face of Obama in power and an agreement to a reset in relations. If you remember that, there's a picture here which shows when, I believe, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov presented Hillary Clinton with a reset button, with a little button that said reset on it, if you remember that in the news. It was important to keep Russia hanging for the next part, knowing that the SCO will continue to try to undermine the dollar. During 2009 and 2010, Obama campaigned around the Middle East, garnering a lot of support from radical Muslims. These Muslims were convinced that Obama was some kind of secret Muslim, parentheses, he isn't, and he gained the trust. He gained the U.S. the trust and support of the Muslim Brotherhood. These relations persist unto today. This is very important for the next part. Part 3. Pride comes before the fall. By the end of 2009 and the start of 2010, the SCO was sure of their imminent victory. With gold bug rumors all around the US dollar and the economy rapidly declining, they asked for all kinds of concessions behind closed doors. They pressed the US to give Russia and China more say in the operation of the World Bank, IMF, and the UNSC. This was all the while China expanded projects in North Africa, Sudan, and Libya. Libya was acting as a donor state to other African countries at the time due to Gaddafi's African Union and later Gold Dinar strategy. The U.S. was not budging. Convinced that they had the U.S. in a bind and that the U.S. under Obama could not act in an aggressive way on the international scene, an expanded loose alliance under the name of BRICS. That's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and Spain. If you know, the S is Singapore. Is it Singapore? I forget. BRICS. The BRICS nations met to discuss a gold-backed currency because they were convinced that Obama would not act in an aggressive way. BRICS meant to discuss a gold-backed currency for international settlements. Basically, this is basically trying to take away the financial power from the World Bank, IMF, and place it and take it away from the West and put it more strength in the East. The BRICS, well, not the East really, but the so-called developing countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, etc. The currency was essentially a means of undermining the U.S. dollar as a stable reference used to sign off on pricing agreements between nations, mainly on supplies of energy which are signed over many years. The U.S. dollar is the most important asset. The U.S. dollar is the most important asset available to the U.S. besides the military. So this would have delivered a death blow to the U.S.'s ability to project power around the world, specifically around the Security Cooperation Organization. Calm as ever, the U.S. diplomats refused to give much attention to the flashy moves made by Russia and China. The Chinese are brilliant at martial arts. The Russians are geniuses when it comes to chess, but when it comes to poker, you just can't beat a poker-faced cowboy with crude logic or physical strength. The enemies of the U.S. were prematurely celebrating their victory, while the U.S. itself was readying itself to deliver the coup de grace. Excuse me, I was just checking it because this is really long. I make this into a couple of videos, or just make it into one long video. Just do one long video. Part 4, Social Media, a Weapon of Mass Disruption. Having learned from the failed Green Revolution in Iran, a much lower-level revolt was brewed on social media. One that only North Africans paid close attention to, the Tunisian Revolution. At the face of it, this one made no sense. Unlike in Iran, the ruling power in Tunisia at the time had strong connections to the U.S., and there was no logical reason for the U.S. to want it out of power. But this isn't about logic, it's about emotions, specifically the emotions of the Arab population and the decision-making process of rulers around the world. The leaked U.S. embassy cables were extremely embarrassing to the Tunisian government, as it detailed the U.S.-Tunisian anti-terrorism cooperation that many in the mostly banned Muslim Brotherhood offshoots, such as Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb, saw as treachery. Whether it was decided to deliberately leak these cables or not cannot be proven. What is undeniable is that they lit the fire and started the Arab Spring in 2010, the leaked cables. By the middle of January 2011, the ruling party in Tunisia collapsed under waves of mostly Islamist and useful idiots helping them. Days later, longtime U.S. and Israeli Egyptian ally Mubarak came under a similar but far more coordinated social media attack. Congregating around accounts such as such and such and others, the Twitter and Facebook spheres encouraged mass demonstrations in Cairo and other cities. The Egyptian government pulled the plug on the internet, but this backfired thanks to a kind of Streisand effect, where an act of mass censorship only makes a public revolt worse. The whole world was watching Al Jazeera and similar channels and celebrated when Mubarak stepped down after Obama asked him to. Russia and China did not understand how to read this move. They assumed the U.S. was attempting to restabilize allied nations. Iran was ecstatic, knowing that an Islamist government will inevitably come into power now that the military-run government had collapsed under waves of popular revolt. Knowing that Egypt was a long-time U.S. ally, they concluded that the social media attack against the Egyptian government was grassroots-based. This couldn't be further from the truth, and underestimating U.S. planning would cost all these states dearly. The Muslim Brotherhood was now aligned with the U.S. and simply carrying out the original plans in 2006 that started the coordinated attack against the U.S. dollar. In other words, Operation Clean Break, etc. In February 17th, simultaneous days of rage were announced in Syria and Libya. The Syrian day of rage fizzled out thanks to a then strong security apparatus that monitored the internet and preempted all such security breaches. Libya was a different matter. It almost immediately escalated into an armed conflict where the military had split. The U.S. and France brought a humanitarian quote-unquote proposal to the UNSC to propose a no-fly zone on Libya that Russia and China de facto accepted. France immediately broke the terms of the resolution to attack the Libyan army on the ground and destroy its infrastructures. Barely sobering up from its celebrations, China left North Africa with its tail in between its legs. There's a source here. Its Russian friends let it down by abstaining and not putting any pressure on France. It was in fact in Russia's interest to allow China to take the fall here, as it would force it to align more strongly with China. But Russia didn't have long to laugh, as it would meet its own fate soon too. Reorganizing the social media campaign and subtly arming the protesters, the civil war in Syria was restarted with a massive social media campaign in March 2015. This delay from February 17th until March 15th gave Syria enough time to study the dynamics of the situation. The government concluded that censoring the internet would backfire, as it did in Libya and Egypt. They concluded the only way to keep things under control was to monitor the internet by any means and use it to de-anonymize it. De-anonymize it to work out the ringleaders of the revolt and those who communicate with foreign agents, foreign intelligence agents like the Saudis, Israelis, and Americans. This is very important for what comes next, so keep in mind. We could go on with the details of the Arab Spring, but let's zoom past that and just come to the conclusion that matters to us today. While things look bad in Syria now, no one can deny that the government is still in firm control of the majority of populated areas, with Islamists holding on to mostly outlying desert areas and government-aligned forces gradually closing in. The Egyptian military ejected the Muslim Brotherhood out of Egypt using a counter-social media campaign that was extremely successful. Russia immediately moved back in to make up with the Egyptian military, who felt betrayed by the U.S. Though the U.S. was in much better shape than it was in 2006, Russia and China could still recover from the Arab Spring and could still take down the dollar. This is when things started to escalate seriously. Part 5, Escalation. By the end of 2012, things were going south for Obama's administration, facing an election and various controversies such as the Benghazi scandal, which was simply Fast and Furious 2 Middle East and North Africa edition. They had to drop Clinton and give her time to lick her political wounds. The Muslim Brotherhood connections were widely exposed by the Republican Party, who indeed had their own connection to terrorist groups in the Middle East. By March 2013, the war in Syria had turned around and the Muslim Brotherhood was losing badly. To cut a long story short, a chemical weapon attack was faked, and the U.S. attempted to enter the war directly in September. I'm sure you all remember that. The U.S. population was completely against it, and due to behind closed doors promises of action by Russia towards Europe, especially the UK, the US administration was isolated. The social media mechanisms that were used to launch the Arab Spring were long discredited in the eyes of those spreading information, and Obama/Kerry were not able to convince the masses of their narrative. An attempt was made to launch kinetic strikes against Syria, but according to my information, these were apparently shot down by Russian seaborne missile defense systems in a port in Syria. It doesn't matter what actually happened, but in the end, the U.S. had to concede to Russia, who offered a way out of the mess of Obama's creation, cross-concession. The U.S. agrees to stop funding the Muslim Brotherhood in Syria, and you have to remember the relationship that the U.S. is allied with Saudi and Sunni groups. Muslim Brotherhood, Saudi, they're Sunni groups. And they are, Russia is allied with Shia, like Iran, Hezbollah, Syria, so it's a proxy war between the West and Russia, basically, or BRICS, or SCO. So the U.S. agrees to stop funding the Muslim Brotherhood in Syria and refrain from threats to the Syrian military, which weakens their readiness against local battles, and Syria hands over its chemical weapons. This was aligned with U.S. regional objectives. It was an offer that Obama couldn't refuse. So here we see the American geostrategic power is starting to wane in the last like 2, 3, even 5 years, or the last 2-3 years, our geostrategic power, largely because it's tied into the dollar and our military and all this bullshit and not in actual industry, is waning. And groups like China, which their power is based on the strength of their economy, are gaining strength. So that's why we have this situation, which is so similar to the situation before World War I. Plan C was then set into motion, the Ukraine scenario. Failing to force the Russian Black Sea fleet out of its Syrian Tartus port, the plan was set in motion to force it out of the Black Sea itself, rendering it worthless as Tartus was a small port and wasn't connected directly to the Russian military industry. Using social media again, and long-harbored misgivings in Ukraine, the U.S. State Department launched a $5 billion campaign to take down the neutral regime in Ukraine and replace it with a U.S.-aligned regime. All of this, of course, is documented. It came out in WikiLeaks that the current president of Ukraine, Poroshenko, is an American agent. He worked for America. It was completely plain and simple in the WikiLeaks documents about Ukraine. So, Plan C set into motion, and the U.S. State Department launched a $5 million campaign to take out a neutral regime in Kiev, in Ukraine, and replace it with its U.S. puppet. Before this could happen, the Russians leaked out damning phone calls detailing plans in Ukraine. Though the establishment media made a good attempt at suppressing the leak, these made big tractions in social media, and they had no choice but to report on them. The coup was delayed to cope with the narrative fallout, but happened a few days later. Russia overestimated the importance of the narrative, but the U.S. noted how disruptive the leak was to its timetable. And also things like this, which go back and forth between our governments, leaking cables, damning cables like this, they have a very bad effect of freezing the relations between Eastern Europeans and Americans, or Eastern Europeans and Western Europeans, not their governments but their people. It makes them see us in a bad light, even worse light than they could possibly see us, which is terrible, because we're behaving like a bunch of fucking barbarians right now, bringing democracy to everybody. So anyway, the U.S. noted how disruptive the leak was to their timetable. The EU and the U.S. were euphoric. Without Ukraine, Russia can never be a strong power, according to Brzezinski. Yeah, there's a Brzezinski quote that says that Russia can never ever become an empire if they were to lose Ukraine. So this is a large part of the thinking. Of course, Brzezinski is on the National Security Council for 30 some odd years, advisor to many presidents, I think beginning with Jimmy Carter, and still advises presidents such as Obama to this day. And he, in his book, made it a point that without Ukraine, Russia can never become an imperial power and would always be inferior and able to be controlled. So really, Brzezinski says it, and also the head of Stratfor, I forgot his name, George Freeman, an intelligence analyst, says that this whole conflict basically, it's just a continuation of the Great Game, which was the battle between England and Russia for control of Eurasia. Places like Azerbaijan, where the U.S. has tremendous investments in natural resources, places where you can project power, where you can use it to project your power into other parts of the world, especially those which are close to other competing major powers. So in the game of global hegemony, Eurasia has a great significance, which is why advisors to Putin like Alexander Dugin, who's a very interesting character, very interesting indeed, very, very, very interesting, who was an advisor to Putin, says that there's a need for a Eurasian Union, And Putin said himself that the fall of the USSR was the greatest crime of the 20th century. So Russia has an interest in recreating creating a Eurasian Union and using that to project power. And the US is trying to stop them and to do the same thing themselves. So that's what this conflict is largely about. So Russia was then forced to act in a manner that would destroy its public relations. Russian troops stationed in Crimea, aided by special forces that infiltrate all government sectors with the support of the most of the population, took over Crimea without firing a single bullet. Though not ideal, this was just the incident needed by the US to turn around the good faith among people Russia had been brewing on the internet for years, like through RT, for example. Part 6, Background, Preparing the Narrative. During the preparation for strikes on Syria, the US government repealed a long-held law to avoid local propaganda. It's important to note the law is only for propaganda directed at Americans rather than propaganda for foreigners. That's nice. While this law was only for state-funded media, the evidence of top-down control by the White House and attorney governor at the very least is now out in the open. But despite this, the government knew the majority of people distrust mass media. The internet posed a difficult problem. Should an extremely unpopular action be used to catalyze civil strife? Well, of course, we know they have the Patriot Act and the FEMA camps for that if there's ever any civil strife. I don't believe in Alex Jones that it's all preparation for some idealized one world order thing. No, I think it's a very real plan by the national security state for what they call continuity of government to ensure that they keep their power no matter what happens. Oh, they're just fine with the president arrangement. Trust me. We live in the New World Order. All this work is just trying to fine-tune it and secure it. They don't want to have a military state in America. They're just fine with us being feudal serfs. But the FEMA camps are there just in case. Just in case. Let's see. During the preparation for strikes on the internet proved to be a difficult problem because an extremely unpopular action could be used to catalyze civil strife. Both the Arab Spring and the coup in Ukraine utilized a powerful new weapon, social media. And I'd like to point out that noted creepy satanic military colonel Michael Aquino, after the military was stinging from the loss in Vietnam, wrote a paper called Mind War, which said that the U.S. military must make use of the United States media in order to win the psychological war in the minds of the people, along with fighting conventional war on the battlefield. So ever since at least the Vietnam days, the media has been one of the primary tools for projection of power by the U.S. military, which is, of course, the strongest organization on the world, funded and controlled by the wealthiest people in the world. And you're saying that the New World Order is coming? You're saying we don't already live in the New World Order? Go fuck yourself, Alex Jones. Alex Jones is funny. If you ever see any show where Alex Jones talks about Israel, or anybody talks about Israel, he gets so nervous. Israel is... Anyway. Both the Arab Spring and the coup in Ukraine utilized a powerful weapon, social media. When one creates a weapon, they're usually also working on its counter. A year after an attempted coup in Iran, an attempt was made by Joe Lieberman and other senators to introduce an internet kill switch. An internet kill switch. So you remember hearing about this, internet kill switch. Various excuses were made for the proposal, but the only reasonable one was fear of a nationwide result, but the plan was flawed, as was seen in the Arab Spring. The Tunisian government enacted a crude form of an internet kill switch, and it caused the government to fall. Egypt's government enacted a more robust kill switch, and it also fell. The only state that avoided using an internet kill switch was Syria, and the government is still in power. It is clear that simply jamming a signal will not calm people down and bring them back home. Certainly not in the U.S., where people are largely sedated through internet-born entertainment. Right? Exactly. Seriously, you there's civil kill switch. There's a civil unrest in America, and then you put on a civil kill switch, motherfucker. We will be out in the streets literally the second that you do that. We will be burning down the friggin' the Capitol buildings all across the friggin' state the second that you try some internet kill switch in America, motherfucker. It's not gonna happen. Okay, needless to say, the internet kill switch plan was shelved. Something more subtle was required. So here we get into Edward Snowden, which is, this guy has a very interesting take on Edward Snowden. I'm not sure how much longer this is, but I think I'm going to stop reading it when he starts to go into Gamergate. Or some of maybe I should keep reading it. Some of you might want to be interested in how this ties into Gamergate. Part 7: Censorship Mechanization. Months before the fake chemical weapons attack in Syria, an important event occurred that most geopolitical analysis misinterpreted. Excuse me. I'm sorry, I'm reading like a friggin' retard here. Months before the fake chemical weapons attack in Syria, an important event occurred that most geopolitical analysts misinterpreted: the Snowden surveillance leaks by NSA whistleblower, quote-unquote, Edward Snowden. Those concerned with foreign policy said that Snowden, being originally a CIA agent, and he has a source here, was still working for them and was attempting to brew bad relations with either Russia or China, where he originally escaped to. This theory is patently false. The leaks were far heavier and much larger. It had a much larger shift in public perception than relatively simple and lower classification. A relatively simple and lower classification embassy cable leak. The Snowden leaks were all top secret and hugely damaging to the NSA and SIGINT, Signal Intelligence, organizations around the world. An important aside, it had no effect on human intelligence organizations such as the CIA, that have different, far more traditional and arguably more reliable means of collecting information and ensuring OPSEC operational security. Those concerned with domestic policy were too busy reacting to the leaks with disdain to really understand the purpose behind them. The information that was leaked detailed the general idea behind decrypting secure communications, splicing undersea cables, and mass surveillance. But it did not go into the specifics, something that foreign governments and terrorists would definitely benefit from. Whether Snowden deliberately leaked only these details as a ruse, or only had access to these details that he siphoned off the NSA, is unknown. What matters is how the leaks affected the population's behavior. What matters is how the leaks affected the population's behavior. You know what? I think that's so important it deserves its own topic. NSA Snowden, is he a counterintelligence? What matters is how the leaks affected the population's behavior. To be specific, the chilling effect that it caused. Knowing you are constantly monitored the way you behave, it forces you to restrict the topics they are willing to discuss. You should know this well. He's talking to the people who post on poll. As the social justice warriors, that's our word for liberal, retard children that think they know everything about how the world should work and everybody is equal. Basically, it's a word for far left, social far left idiots who not even leftists in terms of economics or politics. They just subscribe to this bizarre emotional crusade to make sure that everybody is treated equally and nobody gets their feelings hurt. That's basically what a social justice warrior and SJW is. You should know this well, talking to us on poll, as the social justice warrior's weapon of choice is doxing. Exposing people's true identity brings all consequences of their institutional and employment mechanisms from online discourse into the real world. So, referring to the chilling effect that Snowden's revelations about the NSA had. People in high government positions, people who can do things about it, they might be more hesitant about what they leak or what they expose, or how they try to go against the plans of the New World Order if they know for a fact, because the NSA leaked it themselves, that every communication on the planet is intercepted and stored by them. The NSA, by the way, is national security is the secret government. There's no difference. The type of government that, or the type of people who have national security clearance, the type of people who worked on high levels of the NSA, the type of people who work on projects which are of high importance to quote-unquote national security, those type of people on the military that advise the National Security Council, those are the secret government. Those are the Illuminati. Those are the people who control the world. Anyway, continuing. As the ongoing disclosures by the corrupt, 24 gives a source here for why that Glenn Greenwald is corrupt. But anyway, the corrupt Guardian newspaper star Glenn Greenwald reveal more and more about mass surveillance. There's one certain outcome from these things. Normalization. 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 It's a Soviet word. It's a communist word. It means the normalization of the totalitarian state, the normalization of people just accept it. They accept that the NSA spies on them. That's called normalization. They just accept it now. You know, you just accept that the government does it. Oh, if you don't have anything to hide, it's not a problem. You could say that, fine. But the Constitution protects against unwarranted searches and seizures, protects against, formally intelligence groups like the FBI would need to get a warrant in order to surveil someone, and that is how it should be. If you need to use these kind of tactics against people, you need a warrant. Otherwise, you're violating the law. Whew. That joint. Should I smoke the rest of it? Normalization. People have now largely accepted this surveillance state, and a few more intelligent people have moved on to encrypted communication, like Tor networks. But conversing with each other is useless, or even poll. Poll is a relatively very anonymous place, I guess. 8chan at least, not 4chan. But conversing with each other is useless when we want to get a word. Conversing with each other is useless when we want to get a word out. What's really required is anonymity in social media. This is the element that allows a revolt to take place. He's basically just pandering to. He's basically just pandering to 4chan, to 8chan actually right now, because they focus so much on social media. This is the element that allows a revolt to take place, whether against game journalism or suddenly unpopular ruling regimes. Anonymity is currently required to go against the narrative where your very livelihood, i.e. your employment, for now, is threatened by the easily offended. Facebook took things one step further and added an algorithm where stories that are marked as fake are suppressed in a feed, not completely censored. Stories that are marked as fake in a feed are suppressed and not completely censored. Thank you, Mark Bagel Nose Zuckerberg and Steinowitzenstein. This avoids bringing attention to an act of censorship that sidesteps the Streisand effect. So they don't censor you, but they move your posts down to where people just don't see them. So it just kind of silently whispers away. Facebook is such shit. Oh my god, it is such shit. Anyway, as far as mechanizations go, the UK is in the lead, with the Prime Minister labeling what he calls conspiracy theorists as non-violent extremists. Cameron goes so far as to propose a new law to effectively ban online anonymity and privacy by banning point-to-point encryption. This won't fly in the US, so Obama proposes the same thing in a different way, encouraging all businesses to essentially hand over private encryption keys, allowing the US government to execute targeted man-in-the-middle attacks and effectively decrypt all traffic. But why are the leading figures in the US establishment fearing some sort of revolt? Things aren't great at the moment, but there's nothing really pushing people to move against the ruling oligarchy. This is where things get dark, and the background of all of this begins to make sense. Background: missiles of the Patriots. If you've noticed a recurring pattern so far, every plan that has been put forward actually failed to achieve its objective, but there have always been a contingency plan running in parallel that catches up and continues. In this way, a learned strategist works, and though it is slow and delicate of a process, no state can afford to work in a straight line. The US is in total diplomatic and economic war with Russia, and Russia is losing military and diplomatic clout daily. Its latest loss is in Cuba. Cuba and other traditional allies of Russia, such as Belarus, are not satisfied with its performance in the Middle East and are judging Russia by its ability to protect its own interests there. After all, if it fails to do so, what's the chance of it protecting them should the US turn its attention on them and utilize fourth-generational warfare against them as it did in the Arab Spring? Informational warfare, asymmetrical, what's called hybrid warfare. This is true for the BRICS as well. Their plan to effectively bankrupt the US is ongoing and involves hoarding precious metals by closing energy trade using them. Russia and China have accumulated huge amounts of precious metals in the past few months, and the rate is accelerating after deals made between Russia and Turkey to trade in gold, bypassing US sanctions. Russia is busy trying, and largely failing, to woo South Americans into allowing it to open up a permanent naval base there. China may just succeed with that particular proposition. On the military side of things, both Putin and Obama have been increasingly bellicose in their statements. Obama has issued thinly veiled threats towards Russia regarding its actions in Ukraine. Surely a hot war between these powers could never break out. No one could survive a nuclear war after all, or so people claim. That is essentially what has been thankfully popularized by the movies, but reality has largely moved on. Despite their differences, all states share a primary goal: survival of the state. Survival of the people, i.e. workers, is a secondary goal. What makes up a state? The elite, i.e. very wealthy, people of a nation that acts as the brains alongside their security apparatus, which acts as the nervous system. A nuclear war threatens the existence of both the state and the majority. However, anyone who has seen the devastation left behind from the civil war, such as Homs in Syria, can attest to the fact that it is not it is as bad, if not sometimes even worse, than a nuclear war. Rather than face an externally fourth-generational war, the nuclear option increasingly becomes attractive for any of the three states should they near economic collapse. Furthermore, a much weaker state such as Russia has no other alternatives when faced with conventional warfare than to immediately escalate to nuclear war, as it threatened a few months ago after intercepting missiles launched at Syria. And it threatened again recently when Denmark was talking about, it threatened nuclear attacks against the Danish Navy. Anyway, but launching a nuclear war to avoid a civil war currently has non-negotiable and devastating consequences. Let's make one thing clear. I don't think nuclear war is likely in the short term. At least neither does any of the states involved, but even a small and growing likelihood must be accounted for. In game theory, the end game conditions will affect decisions made right now to be completely informed about the real reasons for the moves. You must be aware of the win condition of a state and the different threats it faces. Continued. This is where the state of missile defense enters the equation. Without much fanfare, the U.S. restarted its ABM program at the end of 2001. I believe ABM is Anti-Ballistic Missile Program, Missile Defense, Anti-Ballistic Missile. So basically, the power of military technology is force of impact times speed of delivery. So a rocket delivering a nuclear missile is currently the most powerful weapon in the world. So the race now is for anti-ballistic missile systems which can counter ballistic nuclear warheads, or ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads. Also, that's why the anti-ship missiles are very important, and why the Air Force is destroying the Air Force is one of the most important things in modern war. So this is long, and I'm going to continue because it's really good. This is where the state of missile defense enters the equation. Without much fanfare, the U.S. restarted its anti-ballistic missile program at the end of 2001. What most are unaware of, however, is that Russia already had a proven anti-ballistic missile system that also utilizes nuclear-tipped missiles such as the SJW that can down most weapons around a certain perimeter. Russia has also developed a new system, a potential satellite killer with an EKV, but with no one paying attention to collective security agreements any longer. It has not been made public. China made its EKV public in 2007 through a missile test. Russia is currently aiming to complete its S-500 program that is said to have the ability to shoot down any quote-unquote space object, including hypersonic missiles, by 2017. In most likelihood, as it has been delayed several times, and due to economic warfare faced by Russia, it won't be completed until 2019. The final phase of U.S. ABM system will be completed around 2019-2020, going by the program schedule. In parallel with missile defense, the Russians have been building up their nuclear stockpile, which now far exceeds that held by us in the West. Obama attempted to preempt this move with a very threatening executive order dealing with Russia's highly enriched uranium, required to make three-stage nuclear devices, in layman's speak, megaton city destroyers. Whatever he tried to do behind the scenes has largely failed, and Russia has been acting in a more secretive way on alerting the West of the locations of its stockpiles. Alongside its now larger nuclear stockpile, Russia has successfully tested ABM-proof submarine-launched missiles. But even with these advantages, and its Kaliningrad site outfitted with ABM-proof SS-26 Stone hypersonic missiles, the U.S. still holds the first strike advantage over Russia. In terms of the outcome of such an exchange, the two states are held at parity thanks mainly to Russia's perimeter, aka dead hand automatic retaliation system. Just like Dr. Strangelove. Some of those who have followed what I've said so far have checked the sources and concluded that I've provided accurate information. They must be asking, why have I not heard of all this before? Well, can you imagine how people's priorities would change suddenly should they become aware that they're facing a small but steadily growing risk of annihilation? This is where we move on to the contingencies in play for all scenarios: economic collapse or aftermath of a nuclear war. Okay, so let's get this thing finished. Part 9, Threat Matrix. When the survival of the majority is threatened by an internal or external cause, The elite will act in a manner that protects them primarily and secondarily protects the majority until that majority begins to threaten the elite. Traditionally, at that point in time, the security apparatus is activated against the people and a civil war breaks out. Without outside support, the theory goes, the security apparatus will win. Should the confrontation continue between the states, and at the current rate things are going, that looks to be the case, eventually one or more of them will enter a state of effective bankruptcy. With the missile defense system coming up in 2019-2020, the decision makers in power will have at least the illusion of an unpunishable strike. But should the state accept its fate of bankruptcy, as the Soviet Union did in the 80s, it will ultimately face the Civil War consequences. They're talking about America. Ideally, a state should hold both options as credible in order to be able to hold the nuclear option as a credible threat against other states, as well as a means to avoid a preemptive war when one of them is cornered and the likelihood of a confrontation goes to 100%. This dynamic is a problem in the U.S. due to the First and Second Amendments. The public is very well armed, and there are enough people who know how to use a weapon such that in the case of any confrontation, they will not only be able to defend themselves, but confront those actively putting them or their family in harm's way. Thanks to the First Amendment, people can, in theory, be as informed as they want to be about the current international and local events, the risks and opportunities they entail. People can be prepared and prepare together without illegally facing prosecution. Currently, people are uninformed, but the situation can revert to that of the 80s, where the anti-war movement was large and vocal. Maybe he meant the 70s, I don't know. It is thus important to keep people uninformed about the risks at play, with Obama casually saying that he won't strike Russia, as if that's a casual thing you can say, and no one calling him out for hinting that he can. And he references an article there. At the same time, it is important to demonize the other states in order to set the narrative for the population and keep the threat at hand credible. After all, the U.S. military is composed of the U.S. people, and if the elites are seen as driving the U.S. people to certain death over nothing but their own survival, the military will refuse or force them out of power. If, however, the accepted narrative is that of external state threatening the existence of the U.S. and behaving in an aggressive, irrational manner, the military is compelled to go along with the population's will or be seen as traitors in external states such as Russia, for example. We now enter speculative territory, but largely important to at least explore to see the bigger picture at hand. In order to remove the threat of the First and Second Amendments, several elements have been launched simultaneously to effectively wage psychological and economic war on the U.S. people and the West in general. So he says, in order to remove the threat of the First and Second Amendments, several elements have been launched simultaneously to effectively wage psychological and economic war on the U.S. people and the West in general. The economic means are obvious. By putting youths in debt, bringing in foreign workers to keep unemployment as high as possible, and so most people are too poor to be able to project their power in any meaningful way. Of course, everybody in America feels the bite of this tactic and understands. Anybody who's sensitive not sensitive, but aware, understands why that's going on, why they're doing that, to keep people out of power, because they want to stay in power. The phenomena of social justice warriors is likely a manifestation of these attempts at psychological warfare called social engineering. Again, what we mean by social justice warriors, those type of girls that go on Tumblr, and they have the crazy colored hair, and they scream about emotional socialism, basically, that there's no such thing as gender, and there's no such thing as ethnicity, and that all white people are evil, and blah, 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 blah. You know, the type of people, the flaming liberal, is a social justice warrior. The phenomena, and it's becoming very prevalent among young people now, just as the alternate, which you find on Poll, and alternate right is also becoming very popular also. The phenomena of social justice warriors is likely a manifestation of these attempts at psychological warfare called social engineering. Instead of the majority of relatively poor people taking those with a truly privileged position, the elite or wealthy, to task, the majority gets locked in war amongst each other. Male privilege against female, white privilege against black, and so on. A lukewarm civil war now brews in the West between both right and left identity politics wing elements, because really it has nothing to do with economy or anything. It's just about identity politics. So so-called right and so-called left identity politics wing elements. The dynamics favor the left thanks to decades of social engineering, both by local and foreign, i.e. the now defunct Soviet Union, agents. Where the left fails, as it has in the case of Gamergate, selective enforcement and institutional corruption is used to set a narrative that allows them to effectively bypass reality. The left is not chosen out of preference of the elite, but because the logical conclusion of it is pure nihilism and complete chaos among the poor and middle-class families in the U.S. So this leftist bullshit is not chosen out of preference by the elite, but because the logical conclusion is pure nihilism and chaos among the poor and middle-class families in the U.S. Let that sink in for a minute. At the same time, the same mechanisms that favor the SJW narrative are used to cover up the international realities that ultimately affect real Western citizens. The Western people will be locked in battles they believe are far more important to them than what's going on in Azerbaijan or Ecuador. These issues are indeed important, but without the larger context of the bigger picture, the blame is incorrectly directed at the mechanizations rather than the mechanizers. As long as the system grinds on, the masses can never threaten the elite and will eventually be forced to hand over their First and Second Amendment rights, thanks to the views of an increasingly growing minority who favors authoritarian over freedom, namely the social justice warriors. He's saying basically the elite are going to use the social justice warriors and also black ops, like, their controlled assassins that they send to shoot up schools and things, to take away First and Second Amendment rights so that they can, for national security reasons, of course. Continued, what's the best way to fight back since we have multiple threats, our own and foreign states? If we preemptively fight back, it might be just what Russia and China were waiting for. If we don't, we are resigned to whatever decision the elite make that puts their survival as the primary win condition of the game. The best way to fight back is to force ourselves in that win condition. Firstly, we can do so through media, and that's not limited to news. Media includes social media, movies, music, and video games. The second way is through education, but it's important to note the most effective is to educate the young, not those of our generation or those older than us. This is where we accidentally found ourselves stuck in the cogs running the system. When you look at the bigger picture, it's not hard to get overwhelmed how things relate to each other, but we have to go through one more step to understand why a long-term project such as social engineering can possibly relate to war. So there's three more parts. Part 10, securing the aftermath. See, I wanted to read this. You can see why I wanted to read it, because it's good. It sums up the whole kind of geopolitical situation. And instead of making about 20 different videos talking about things and then making another video try to bring things together, I can make this video and then I can make other videos and reference this one, and we can all have it tied up right here so we can see the geopolitical situation. Part 10, securing the social aftermath. Securing the aftermath, rather. Let us briefly consider what some might consider to be the best-case scenario of the international conflict outlined in parts 1 to 5. Russia and China fold. They accept all terms and conditions of the Western elite. There's a single monopoly of power in the world, with an international surveillance over every human being and censorship to prevent revolts. revolts. But unknown to the security apparatus, all of the mechanizations would have worked to serve a dual purpose. The elite have as long as they want to run their social engineering programs and will naturally take a path that serves their interests alone as established individuals. A culture destroyed. I'm going to read that again. Let's briefly what some may consider to be the best case scenario of this international conflict outlined in parts 1 to 5. Russia and China fold. They accept all terms and conditions of the Western elites. There is a single monopoly of power in the world, with an international surveillance over every human being and censorship to prevent revolts. But unknown to the security apparatus, all the mechanizations would have served a dual purpose. The elite have as long as they want to run their social engineering programs and will naturally take a path that serves their interests alone as established individuals. A culture destroyed by social engineering would effectively reduce the A culture reduced to social engineering would have effectively reduced the risk to the elite to zero and brought them back to the feudalistic scenario that heavily favors the established, which is what we live in. But we could really go even further. Human populations will be treated as they have always been, nothing more than cattle, and the traditional means of controlling a cattle, admittedly impractically sized population, is implemented. All kinds of insane justification will be used to commit acts of mass barbarity or pure ignorance, just like in the Dark Ages, with a new religion based on slave morality. The prototype being SJWism, social justice warriorism, with the original sin being a privileged white male, and the only means of repentance is to listen and believe, among other obvious analogies. A brave new world, a utopia for the establishment, a hellish dystopia for what will be left of their servants. This is real, folks. Like Alex Jones liked to say, this is real. This is real. This is really happening. You can't just close your eyes. This is actually fucking happening. This isn't a dystopic novel. This isn't a dystopic movie. This isn't, it's not Brave New World or 1984. This is actually happening. This is actually possible. There are actually plans on the books. There are actually operations in place. There are actually operators. There are actually programs and institutions and think tanks and billions and trillions of dollars and military might, which is at stake here, and which has the power to make any of this come to pass, to preserve the power of the truly privileged, that is, people like the Rothschilds. In what some might consider the worst case scenario, the US, Russia, or China overstep the other sometime after the missile defense shields are up and running. Misinformed about the effectiveness of the anti-ballistic missile system, a leader decides to launch a conventional strike against a high-value target, invade a territory controlled by the other state, or launch de-escalation strikes through the use of tactical nuclear weapons to force a peaceful conclusion to the conflict, i.e. to get the other side to fold by admitting their bluff, well before the risk of nuclear war becomes a reality. The elite power base on both sides and their extended families, i.e. our best and brightest, as they will be called, will have secured their safety in the form of underground bunkers. And he provides like 1 billion article links to show that these bunkers exist. Of course, we all know these bunkers exist. They were built in the Cold War. And I'm sure under America is a network of underground bunkers that has probably eaten up a significant amount of the black budget, quote unquote, that money that Congress has no idea where it goes. The good news is that the majority of nuclear weapons will not even take off from their bases or their bunkers. Both sides worried about the other's nuclear stockpiles rather than annihilating the other cities' populations will target those alongside the anti-ballistic missile systems. The majority of nuclear weapons will be destroyed in their sites. However, both sides will dedicate at least some forces to cripple the other's economic and political power bases. Majority cities will be targeted alongside heavily industrialized areas. The bad news is, regardless of the target, the radioactive contamination will spread far and wide, destroying much of the soil relied on to obtain food. Life will be harsh for those living in the surface, while life will be uncomfortable for those secured below. They won't have to worry about any long-term damage to their genetics and offsprings. There will be only one logical concern for all states: those on the outside attempting to break into the bunkers. So here's how we come through Gamergate and Common Core, which are conspiracy type things. I hate to use that word conspiracy because it doesn't really mean anything, but which are counterintelligence, which are terrorist programs being carried out by the elites against us to control us. Common Core and Gamergate, anti-Gamergate. Well, what Gamergate's about anyway, it's trying to stop this whole social justice warriorism, social Marxism, cultural Marxism, call it whatever you want, that wants to make it into a religion, which we've said how it's actually counterproductive, and it actually leads to nihilism and destruction of the family and things like this, and of the lower middle class societies. Final part 11, Psychopolitics, Weaponizing the Youth. By the time the anti-ballistic missile system has come up, those who are 11 or 13 years old today would be the young adults of society, the most able-bodied and generally healthy enough to survive a nuclear war. Should war come later, it would be the younger people, but regardless, all of them would have went through years of Common Core education, promoting authoritarianism, and well acquainted with the gamified training process. These people will be no threats to the elites who will remain safe in their bunkers. They will be docile as rabbits in the field, perhaps occasionally passively aggressing, attacking others to check their privilege. Gone will be the sense of what real privilege is, and of course the survival instinct. And gone will be the independent thought that fails to develop when a child's brain is overstimulated with psychopolitically designed educational games for many hours a week. So this is what Gamergate hit on. The whole Gamergate scandal hit on this whole type of programming of kids. Still wondering how Bill Gates can convince other elites in a single meeting about the merits of pooling all their wealth together to use it for the quote-unquote greater good? He's just letting them in on the bigger picture, and whatever he has said to convince them to hand over a huge sum of ill-gotten gains. Or rather, whatever he said convinced them to hand over a huge sum of ill-gotten gains. What could be so important for these scumbags to do so? Does Zuckerberg strike you as an honest individual, for example? No. Fuck you, Zuckerberg. Fuck you, Zuckerberg. Promoting social justice, censorship is one of the key elements to force the acceptance of Common Core and similar programs. One of the lead designers of this Common Core thing, that's another video I need to make about Common Core. There's definitely one that goes on there. One of the people who designed Common Core said that he literally came to a conference of people talking of concerned teachers and things, and he said that one of his inspirations behind Common Core was to make learning equal because of white privilege. He literally said that it was because of white privilege that it has inspired him. And so he wants to, if you look at Common Core, it's absolutely ridiculous. It's just going to have the effect of dumbing down the lower classes. It's absolutely, it's communism applied to education in a way which it never has been or attempted. It's absolutely insane, and there's a lot of fight over Common Core right now anyway. Promoting social justice, censorship is one of the key elements to force the acceptance of Common Core and similar programs. So he's saying that this is why Bill Gates has gone behind Common Core, because of this whole agenda with the anti-ballistic, how it relates to the anti-ballistic missile system and national security, continuity of government, etc. It has passed smoothly in Sweden and other eunuch nations, but they knew from the start that America would be a tough nut to crack. That's why false flagging and media smear jobs are essential to setting up the narratives required to force people to act against their own interests. When Five Guys Burgers and Fries was launched, it was hoped that it would be used in the same manner as Rantic Media attempted to use the leaked photos of Emma Watson during her failed UN speech. None could have predicted the transition of the Five Guys saga into Gamergate. League after league, dig after dig, he's talking to the forum again, you all came very close. He's actually not talking to Poll, he's talking to Gamergate forum. Y'all came very close to, but Gamergate was largely very much interrelated with Poll's ideas, or what spawned Gamergate. There would have been no Gamergate without Poll, that's for damn sure. League after league, dig after dig, you all came very close to figuring out what was going on in your hobby. Some were brave and ventured out to see the same pattern repeated in the wider media, such as WikiLeaks recommended that you do. And he links here a status from WikiLeaks, which was directed towards Gamergate. I would like to provide the link. Maybe I'll edit it into the video, or I can provide a link to this image, so if you want to go through all the articles that were sourced, you can do that. But anyway, so this is when the media decided to preemptively attack and smear Gamergate, which was and still is largely a discussion platform. Essentially, knowing they were playing chess with superior gamers, they flipped the table and defecated on it, and then blamed you for the toxic mess of their own doing. Distraction after distraction, the freaks came out and attacked you in order to distract you from your campaign. You might think that they've discredited themselves in front of us and in front of logical people, but in the end, they're not concerned about alienating you at all. What they're concerned about is you halting their program to turn the youth into censorship-loving, psychologically programmed, useless time bombs who believe the only issue to be concerned about is identity politics, and who have been trained to defy their parents and respect state authority. As the plan goes, they will keep Gamergate alive with media assaults to generate lashback, which is funny because before this was written, after this was written, there's a episode of Law & Order release called, I forget the name of it, Law & Order Special Victims Unit, which is a hilarious name, which was about Gamergate, and it depicted Gamergate literally as terrorists. They will just keep Gamergate alive with media assaults to generate lashback, just long enough to use it as a justification for the very censorship they require. This achieves another objective, as it brings your ability to do anything about the implementation of Common Core to a halt. Ouch. We're dealing with master planners here, people. Should they fail and should the public be woken up about the social engineering importance of video games and Common Core, they may have a backup plan. I don't have enough information to see that far. Perhaps they will launch an interracial war to keep us busy and weak instead. Taking a final look at things, the best way to teach, the best way to bond, and the best way to entertain a child is through a game. Nietzsche said, man's maturity, to have regained the seriousness that he had as a child at play. That's why alternatives to educational games must be eliminated or polluted down until they are so unenjoyable that the children never grow up. Or rather, so that they are unenjoyable so that the children never grow up. The only games that will be accepted are those that educate, otherwise it will be childish, as gaming has grown up, an inversion of reality. Who should be in control of that game? The corrupt journalists, the money-grubbing developers producing unchallenging trash to appeal to a larger market, taxpayer-funded Common Core programs, or you? It's important to note that as well as fighting an external struggle, we must fight an internal one. We are a degenerate, socially engineered generation. We value individuality above all else, and ignore the importance of society and culture at large. We fail to value children as our own future and instead see them as objects of desire to show off as baby photos to friends. Or I could say a lot more about how the baby boomers viewed their own kids, definitely extensions as their own extensions of their own objects of desire. You know, when meaning the extensions of their own ego, controlling things and whatnot, but definitely not respect and value them as they should, until they abandon them to 12 or more years of brainwashing, often in state institutions, government schools, which are places where kids are brainwashed with this social justice warriorism, with this conformity, with this inability to think critically, with the lies about how the world works, which they're allowed to be indoctrinated with, because of course feminism has mandated that no woman should have to be a housewife. You should all be independent, and so they divorce their husbands and end up in children end up in single parent households in a large majority of cases in America. So with the family destroyed, again, feminism financed by the Rothschilds, or not Rothschilds, with the Rockefellers, Aaron Russo said. So with that strength destroyed, they're able to be programmed by the state. It is through no fault of our own. Our parents have failed us, and we are placed in the checkmate position today. Without prospects of work, without even a bright future to look forward to, perhaps without even life. But there is still some hope, and it lies in our children. We will likely not see a bright future, no matter what we do. But we must cleanse ourselves of the selfishness that has driven our parents and us to the point that we live in today. Rid yourself of nihilism and remember that no matter what happens in the end, if we protect, entertain, and educate our children, who are our precious future, however long it takes, our children or their children will one day taste freedom. Finn.